You're listening to the Place Northwest COP26 podcast series,
a dedicated series that explores all things net zero carbon and sustainability within the built environment.
Alongside some of the biggest names in property, we'll be delving into topics such as
why the market is pushing net zero carbon faster than legislation.
Is renovation and retrofitting better for the planet than new construction?
How can we balance sustainability concerns with profit margins?
And much, much more.
Don't miss any future episodes. Subscribe at placenorthwest.co.uk/subscribe or wherever you get your podcasts. Hi, I'm Julia Hatmaker, Deputy Editor at Place Northwest. On this episode of the podcast, we'll be discussing how engineering is key to helping the UK meet its sustainability goals. Joining me are two directors from Civic Engineers, James Bruce and Paul Morris. Civic Engineers is a civil, structural, and transport engineering practice focused on having a positive impact on the environment and enabling people to lead happier and healthier lives. Its 135-strong team delivers projects that help to create and transform buildings, neighborhoods, and cities, bringing significant economic, social, and environmental benefits to those places for all that live, work, and visit there. Paul, can you just, I know I gave a little bit of a summary here, but can you just explain a little bit more about Civic Engineers and what you all do?
Yeah, I think you covered it quite well there, Julie. We are civil, structural and transport engineers. We've got studios in Manchester, Leeds, London and Glasgow. There are around 130 of us, and we do endeavour to make a positive impact on all the places in which we work and on the environment. We're really lucky to be involved in some really exciting projects, both here in Manchester and further afield. We're lead designer on delivery of the Mayfield Park for you and I and PP O'Connor. That's a 6.5 acre city centre park in Manchester, hopefully completing next year. We're working with Far East Consortium to deliver around 300 low carbon homes and a new park in Collyhurst. So lots of exciting stuff going on in Manchester, and then further afield, we're engineering the Climate Innovation District for our client Situ in Leeds. And we're working on what's been billed as the, and I never get this right, the largest net zero carbon housing scheme in the country for City of York Council, which is going to see 600 passive house homes delivered over the next few years. So lots of interesting projects and hopefully a lot that we can contribute to the discussion.
Wow, so you all aren't busy at all.
Lots on.
But we are here to talk about sustainability. So James, this one's for you. Because there's this giant push towards being carbon zero and net zero by 2050, how can engineers help make that happen?
We can help quite significantly with buildings and construction currently accounting for about 40% of energy-related carbon dioxide emissions. We as engineers have an opportunity to have a substantial impact on that. That 40% of carbon dioxide is about 3 times more than the aviation sector, so it's significant, and 50% of which is associated with the construction period of the infrastructure or the building that you're working on. So through carefully considered design, informed decision making, and pursuit of nature-based solutions where possible, we can impact that. If an individual was to cut out meat, dairy, and beer from your diet in a year, for example, you could save approximately 2 tons of carbon dioxide. Or if you stop driving your car, you could save 3 tons in a year. So as a structural engineer, if we were to achieve a 20% reduction in our embodied carbon in a building structure, for example, we can have an impact of 200 tons in a year. So, our individual decisions on every single project are huge.
Yeah, 200 tons, that's massive.
Yeah.
Okay, so how should we bring engineers in to maximize this skill set that you guys have and make a project as sustainable as possible then?
An answer to that is that we should be engaged as early as possible. As engineers, we're lucky enough to be able to influence decisions from the kind of strategic position all the way through to the detail. We quite often get involved in projects that allow us to influence the location of developments and how that they knit back into the existing infrastructure. a big driver behind that, no pun intended, is with a view to reducing the demand for car travel, promoting walking and cycling. We recently completed a design guide for Trafford that was based around the 15-minute neighbourhood. So all amenities being available within a 15-minute walk or cycle from people's home. So that we're in a really good position to be able to influence those strategic decisions. From that point, we can then look at movement, access and connections, again, promoting active travel. How do we design our infrastructure to enable and encourage people to walk, cycle, rather than using vehicular transport? And there's massive savings, I think James has already touched on, that can be associated with that modal shift, that behavioural change that we can influence. And then that goes through into actually what is the development that we're looking to deliver that I think James is going to pick up on.
Well, actually, I'm going to interrupt you, James, because I am curious about that whole using engineering to kind of change how people are accessing a development and moving around within it. I mean, how do you change people's behavior on that?
A lot of it is about proximity, so actually reducing the demand for travel and the travel distances, so making walking and cycling more attractive propositions. But then what often gets overlooked is actually the importance of creating attractive networks, attractive streets, where people actually want to be spending time outdoors, engaging with their surroundings, walking, running, cycling, making their way to work or shops or other amenities in the outdoors rather than being locked up inside their cars. A lot of the work we do in terms of public realm transformation is about creating those attractive streets and improving the quality of people's journeys outside of their cars, so that they're not so keen to be cooped up.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I definitely felt that during lockdown. Like if there was a pretty path, I was like, oh, I want to walk down that. And I'd much be more inclined to like cycle or walk if it was pretty. So
Exactly.
James, I'm sorry, you were going to take over on this one.
So yeah, just to pick up on kind of the next step, if as a team that you collectively decide that you do need to build something, the next step is really maximizing the use of the existing assets that you've already got on the site. So effectively, you're building less. You're reusing existing buildings, reusing existing infrastructure to avoid doing everything from scratch. And the bits that you do decide that you need to do from scratch, you build cleverly, use low carbon materials, use efficiencies in those materials, embrace new technologies like design for manufacturing and assembly. Is really key to achieving the reductions that we need to, where things are created in a regularized and optimized manner, in a controlled facility, in a factory, for example, where you've got the opportunity to reduce waste, to offer faster construction on site, which again has an overall carbon saving. If you're not on site for as long, you're reducing that construction period, which I mentioned earlier. Therefore, you're reducing the amount of carbon involved. And designing cleverly is considering the material inefficiencies as well. I've read a fact recently that the iStrut have demonstrated that material inefficiencies in buildings can be up to 50% commonly, which is like an overuse of all the materials by a huge factor that really needs to be explored and tackled.
Yeah, what do you mean when you say the inefficiency?
So just the overuse. So if you're not optimizing in a structural frame, for example, if you're not working your way around the building, if you're designing for the common rather than the individual situation in that building, those elements are going to be over designed to up to 50% in some cases. So there's too much material being put into the building just for not thinking down to the detail and trying to be efficient in your time in terms of the design rather than efficient in the material that you're designing with.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And earlier you were talking about how it's important that we kind of maximize what already exists. How do you decide what's good to keep and what needs to go?
Really look into the history of it, look into what it's been used for previously. There's a lot of capacity in existing structures. For just mentioned there, the 50% overutilization of materials, that you can change a use of a building with an increase in load by using that that spare capacity in the individual structural elements. We've done a number of different building conversions in the city centre where the previous use as a warehouse or a mill, for example, has a high loading capacity from its previous use, which allows it to be switched to a residential or a commercial office use to today's loading standards much simpler.
Yeah, and that definitely is something you see a lot in Manchester. I feel like every mill is being turned into a new, very cool apartment complex on
Yeah,
there.
and they look great. Yeah, they look great as well.
Like, love that. I love the exposed brick, and I'm like, these are the coolest apartments. Great. Okay, so we're going to reduce demand for car travel. We're going to maximize the existing assets. We're going to build cleverly. You touched on materials a little bit. Any more on like how we can be using materials in a wise way?
Using carbon sensitive materials as the first choice. If we're building something new, use carbon sensitive materials. Use timber. Use natural materials where you can avoid the carbon heavy things like concrete and steel. If that's possible, if that's within the material limits from a structural engineering perspective. If you can't avoid that, then still using those traditional materials, but use more modern technologies for it, and swap traditional slabs for post-tension slabs, which have a lighter reinforcement quantity in there. So you're reducing the amount of steel in there. It allows you to achieve the same building spans for reduced slab depths, therefore using less volume of concrete. The building weighs less. The foundations are smaller. There's one decision further up the building can have knock-on effects all the way down in terms of material quantities. And then things like even newer technologies like cement-free concrete, which is only really in its infancy, and it's something that we're hopefully going to be pouring one of the, I think it's going to be the second in the country, but the first in Manchester, of the graphene reinforced concrete solution. A project I probably can't say it right at this moment in time. So that's really exciting for us. But again, that can add, it's significant strength to the concrete, up to 50% strength of the concrete for much more carbon neutral, carbon free material that's going in there.
Yeah, I think the thing that's blowing my mind with all of this is it's realizing how, like you said, those smaller decisions, they add up and it's a snowball effect. And, one thing can make a huge difference.
I think a great example of actually reusing what you have and utilising low carbon materials is the work we're doing at Mayfield Park. Some of the infrastructure that we're delivering there, we're using reinforced earth walls, which use the existing material on site rather than reinforced concrete or similar. We're using gabion basket retaining structures filled with demolition rubble from the buildings that previously occupied the site. And we're actually reusing some of the iron girders from the bridge structures that were there previously and the culvert structures to form the new bridges as part of the park. So I think that's a really excellent example of reusing what you have and minimizing carbon within our designs.
It's also just really cool because all of a sudden, like, you're adding this whole historical element to that development. Like, I'm going to go to that park now and be like, oh yes, let me tell you about the walls here.
I think it is. I mean, it is super cool. There's a big heritage angle to it as well. And what engineering with a kind of social conscious and carbon conscious does mean is that it's actually a lot more interesting for us as well. So not that we didn't enjoy engineering previously, but it's super exciting and interesting to be able to deliver these kind of projects.
So just going back to what I was saying earlier about looking into the history of the building and its or the asset and the infrastructure that was its previous use, and that's one of the most exciting bits. So the design process in just learning about the different the different uses through its life is sometimes it throws up some real interesting snippets of history, like the like Avro that we've just completed on in Piccadilly for Splash, where the previous building was used as the first factory of the AV Row manufacturing of planes in the UK. So it was fascinating to see what and how that was used, and some of the surprises that we uncovered where we removed some of the modern finishes. I say modern. It's all relative to the 200-year-old building, but the modern finishes of the floors, and we got back down to the original timber boards of the floors, and you could see where the machinery had been placed, and the worn foot treads. As someone had been working their way around that machine, it made the floor that started undulating up and down across the floor plate, and you could just, if you stood there, you could see that, you could imagine there would be bits of machinery and people working continuously in this same pattern for however many years to wear the timber floorboards down.
That is so cool. I feel like I would get really obsessed with all that stuff, and then, like, I would forget that I was supposed to be engineering. I'd be like, "Let me tell you a little bit more about the history."
Yeah.
It's not too late, Julia. You could still make that career change.
There we go. There's hope for me yet. So, I do wanna touch on green infrastructure because it seems to be the big buzz phrase at the moment. So, help me and help our listeners out. Can you guys define green infrastructure so we can all sound smart in conversations from here on out?
Uh, I'll certainly try. I mean, to me and to us, I think it's all about nature. And in particular, as engineers, it's about bringing nature into our urban environments. So essentially, how can we create networks of green, of landscape, of nature, of green spaces within our towns and cities, whether that's parks, playing fields, gardens, trees within streets, rain gardens, or other such features within streets, or green roofs. And as well as creating a platform for biodiversity and renaturalization, there's massive health and well-being benefits that have been demonstrated, in particularly in urban settings, of actual people coming into contact with nature, and it not just being a very grim, grey setting. So there's the health and well-being benefits associated with bringing those natural elements back into our city, but also, of course, massive environmental benefits, whether it is from carbon capture itself from the plants and trees, cooling of the environment through evaporation, shading from the tree canopies, and of course sustainable drainage, which is something that we're looking to incorporate into all of our projects, nature-based sustainable drainage, and essentially the soft landscape that we bring into the urban setting can act as a big sponge and offset what otherwise could be quite a hard development. So when it rains, the landscape absorbs the rainwater and reduces flood risk. And you see from the recent floodings across the country that that's an ever-growing, a topic that's ever-growing in importance and really critical. We are actually working with Manchester City Council at the moment, not only delivering the new parks at Mayfield and in Collyhurst, but actually looking to retrofit SUDs and green infrastructure as part of cycle infrastructure or in city streets here in the town centre, in the city centre, sorry, just because of all the kind of multifunctional benefits that nature can bring to our urban environment. Did
So
that clear it up?
I think so. So green infrastructures, bringing in nature. It's thinking about things like green roofs, blue roofs, how we're, activating a space, what's going on with the flood systems. It's basically just a very, very big term is what I've gotten from this.
I think it is, yeah, it's vast, but I think in summary, and certainly from our perspective, it's about bringing nature into the urban environment.
Yeah. So, okay, given that we've kind of talked a little bit about how engineers can help out with helping your building be as green as possible and sustainable as possible, how are you guys feeling about our ability to meet the UK's net zero goals? Is there any hope? Is it a lost cause? Will we make a good effort but not kind of get there in the end? What are we thinking?
There's always hope. I think we're currently on track, but we need to accelerate, I think is the way to summarize it. That targets that have been set for up to 2022, I think we're just on track to achieve as a country. But anything beyond that, I think the projections are that at the current rate, we're on track to achieve those targets, and we would need to accelerate what we do, and particularly in the construction industry, where most of what we've talked about here is all just voluntary action by people that are involved in the projects, or clients that are running the projects, or people's own personal goals to of what they want to achieve. It's all unregulated. There's no regulations out there that set any targets for the construction industry to hit. There is, when I say there was hope, there's a draft of what's is the building regulations part Z has just been released, which is really exciting. If that was to come in, that would give some kind of regulation, some structure to what we need to achieve in our building projects and targets through the next up to 2050, if not earlier.
Yeah, I think measurable targets would really help a lot of people out, because it's hard to have this giant goal that seems so far away and to actually I'm a giant procrastinator. I did that all through college. Like, I'll be like, oh, the deadline's, a month from now, I'll do all the work the night before. Like, you have all the good intentions, but it's only when you're like up against a deadline that you're like, I'm actually going to do this. So I definitely agree with you there.
That period is coming to the point where it's, I think we've procrastinated enough and we need to accelerate things a little bit. That deadline is only ever getting closer to us. And it's a significant deadline.
I was just going to add, I think it is, it's obviously, evidently something that is incredibly important to all of us. And I think it could be quite easy to get bogged down in challenges and seeing them as reasons that we can't achieve those goals. But I think what we do need to do is maintain the momentum, positivity and energy, and actually work collectively to making sure that we do the very best we can. And why not try and exceed those goals?
It needs to be normalized. That kind of attitude is currently the exception. That if a project is achieving some kind of net zero targets, it's out there on its own. It's not. It should the out there on its own should be the one that isn't achieving the targets. That's hopefully where we're going to get to with the regulation of things like Part Z in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, and it feels like to me, just having spoken with you guys, it sounds a lot of this is very attainable if we just kind of bring engineers in earlier on and kind of take that extra time to actually spend figuring out how you can make a project sustainable rather than just going with what you've always done. It does feel like it does require like some additional consideration, but it's well worth it in the end.
Yeah, I think so. I think it applies to engineers, but it's about investing that time in the thought process, in the design process, collaboratively as a design team, and also with local communities. I think there has historically been perhaps within our profession and other professions as well, there's been a tendency to apply standard details to solutions regardless of the question. And we are moving to a position now where there is, I think there's a lot much more of a focus on collaboration, actually working, as I say, with communities to understand places for themselves and as unique entities, rather than just trying to apply a standard solution to a problem. So yes, definitely get engineers involved early, but involving all of the design team and in particular engaging with communities at that early stage can make a massive impact too.
Yeah, and I have to say, it does sound like it makes the project like way more interesting. Like, you start out with something that's really cool, and then like as you delve more into it, you just get more and more invested and more interested in it, which is really great. So I want to make sure I've understood all this. So I'm gonna recap. Let me know what I got right, if I've got anything wrong, if we need to add something in. And I feel like the key points are there is a huge opportunity for us to cut carbon emissions and carbon costs basically when it comes to construction. As James pointed out, you can in the construction phase cut it by 200 tons if you get an engineer in and they're doing the best things possible, and 200 tons is massive. I was really impressed when you said earlier that 2 tons is how much I could cut out if I changed my diet, and to know that I could do it a lot more was crazy. Other key points is that if you engage an engineer early on, they can kind of help you when it comes to the design phase, reducing the need for car travel, making walking more appealing by kind of building up these walkways and making them beautiful. You can maximize the existing assets that you have so you don't have to tear everything down. You can reuse, repurpose. Also making sure you build smart, using the best kind of technology, reducing some of the material if you can. And finally, my last point was to always consider doing green infrastructure and really consider like the ways you can bring nature into a scheme. Did I miss anything? Did I nail it?
I think you nailed it, Julie.
Nailed it.
It's music to my ears. Thank you. All right. Well, James and Paul, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I hope you had a good time. You have to say yes.
Thank you.
You did.
Thank you for having us.
Perfect. Thanks for coming on. That's going to wrap up our podcast. If you want to learn more about Civic Engineers and how they can help your next development scheme be more sustainable and green, you can find out more at civicengineers.com. I'm Julia Hatmaker with Place Northwest. Thank you so much for listening and have a good rest of your day.